Hi, my name is Daria Mezensova and welcome to Politeka World Show. In today's show, we'll talk about the following. Iran agreed to send ballistic missiles to Russia. What will be the future of this cooperation and how Western partners of Ukraine could stop the supply of the weapons? We will talk about it with our expert. With us today is analyst of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future, Ilya Kusa. Let's watch it and comment. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be in the heart of the news about Ukraine. About the future effect of the cooperation between Iran and Russia, we will talk with analyst of the Ukrainian Institute of the Future, with Ilya Kusa. Ilya, I'm happy to have you here.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Don't you think at all that this cooperation between Iran and Russia is really dangerous for our country, for Ukraine?
In a way, I mean, militarily it is dangerous because we see consequences on the field. But otherwise, I mean, strategically, I don't think Russian-Iranian cooperation is some kind of an eternal friendship or a strategic alliance. I see it more as a, situational partnership. So as a partnership that was forged only now under certain circumstances because Russia and Iran decided that they want to go with this deal, But I don't think that this means that they will be like allies for decades to come or something like that. So, but answering your question, yeah, I mean, it is dangerous for Ukraine because the more Russia has allies or partners and the more damage they can inflict upon Ukraine.
But don't you think that it's quite a decisive step from the Iranians when they inject themselves into a war on European soil? We understand it.
Well, they didn't intervene directly. We need to understand that. It's not a direct intervention on their side. So they didn't send troops on the ground or something like that. They sold weapons to Russia. And this is a significant decision on their side because previously Iran and Russia had troubles when dealing in military, when dealing with weapons, military technologies, because Russia and Iran are competitors in certain aspects. When we're talking about military and industrial cooperation, they are competitors on the market, and so for Iranians, it is a significant step forward. And that's why I think that that the deal itself was not about money. It was about, I don't think, because Iran doesn't need, the situation in Iran is not so critical that they need money. I think that the conditions in this deal may have included exchange of technologies, of critical technologies, military or nuclear technologies, for example. That's why, or maybe any other political concessions, for example, that Iran could have squeezed out of Russia, for example, in Syria for this deal. So, yeah, I mean, it is significant, but again, Iran didn't intervene directly, at least hasn't intervened directly yet. So we are talking only about a military deal, a deal about a purchase, a deal on selling weapons to Russia. That's all.
But what do you think, if you are talking about the future of this cooperation, how fruitful or destructive could be this partnership with Russia for Iran?
For Iran, it certainly can be fruitful because they, as I said, I assume that they got certain concessions out of Russia, if this is true. And there were certain materials in the media, including Western media, about certain technologies that Iran may have acquired from Russia. For example, technologies to build more advanced military jets, or, for example, nuclear technologies that could help them enhance their nuclear program. It can be fruitful in terms of political concessions or geopolitical concessions that Russia may make towards Iran and Syria, for example. Because if we're talking about Syria, Russia's recent decision to withdraw some of their troops from Syria and S-300 anti-aircraft systems from Syria actually enhanced Iran's positions there, because I mean, the less Russia has military presence in Syria, the more powerful Iran is. So in this way, it is fruitful for Iran because it serves their interests, regional interests in these terms. On the other hand, of course, it can be destructive because, again, this is a great risk for Iran. Certain Western countries have already put sanctions against Iran for this deal, and I think other sanctions are coming. And yesterday, Switzerland decided to join sanctions against Iran also because of this issue. And I think in these terms, it can be, of course, it is a risky adventure on Iran's side, yes. So I think they will bear certain risks and losses because of this deal.
We know that Iran is a master in bypassing different restrictions, sanctions. How Russia could use their experience, Iran's experience in this way?
I think they are pretty limited here. I don't think they will use Iran to circumvent sanctions because Iran is already under great sanctions pressure. And actually, this myth mainly of Iran being the mastermind of these sanctions, counter-sanctions game, I think, yes, Iran was able to counter Western influence despite sanctions pressure and to do what they wanted to do, even under sanctions. But this doesn't mean that this doesn't mean that they were able to develop their economy the way they wanted. Sanctions had a great and a destructive impact on Iran's economy, and we need to understand that. That's why Russia is limited in their options to use Iran in order to counter Western sanctions. So I think Iran will not be the priority for Russia in its strategy to counter Western sanctions. I think that they will use other countries that are not under sanctions, that also maintain neutral position towards Russia-Ukraine war. For example, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan. I mean, all other countries that are not under Western pressure, sanctions. That's easier, less risky, and actually they have the same opportunities there than in Iran. And again, Iran is a very difficult country, and the relationship between Russia and Iran is not as if Russia can, dictate Iran, anything they can say them. They can't say what they want to Iranians. That's why they can control the process completely. So I think what is going on now, if we're talking about certain hubs to circumvent sanctions, they're already forming, but not in Iran.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think about cooperation? You mentioned, for example, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. So what could be the ground of this cooperation for Russia with these countries? So we know that now the most effective military effect for Russia was the partnership with Iran. We could tell about drones, about now the future cooperation is ballistic missiles. So don't you think that Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Kazakhstan will hesitate to help like that? Russia.
Militarily, certainly. Militarily, they will not go into deals with Russia because this is too risky. Iran decided to take on this risk because, as I said previously, they are already under sanctions. So they don't have, especially after negotiations with the United States over nuclear program failed at the end of summer. It was the last thing they believed could work. Because this was the last and only option of how Iran could have got rid of sanctions. And then when these negotiations failed, I think that was the crucial moment when they decided to go to conclude this deal with Russia. Other countries, of course, they don't have this. They are pretty much integrated, very closely integrated with Western markets. They don't want to lose that. They don't want to become a pariah on the world arena. They don't want to become isolated, of course. So militarily, they will not do that. But I mean, if we're talking about cooperation, trade cooperation, energy cooperation, if we're talking about tourist flows or about, for example, offering certain safe haven for Russian financial capital, yeah, why not? This is what Turkey and United Arab Emirates were doing.
And we could see the figures, so that the trade between Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and other countries, they are increased
Exactly.
During the war with Ukraine. So, and if we are talking about the steps, what could be made by the Ukrainian officials, I heard about some work with American officials. So Ukraine think that they could make some blocks of the access to the logistic paths of the drone supply, ballistic missiles. What do you think about it? Is it a real thing, or it's just a talks and nothing could be made there? So
it depends on what we're talking about. I have no idea.
Maybe some restrictions. So could America help, for example, Ukraine to restrict this cooperation, this logistic passes?
With sanctions, no, because sanctions could not, block everything.
Yes.
You can do.
What other way?
Well, there are ways to at least track, for example, on how these weapons are being delivered to Russia. We don't know that. Well, at least I haven't seen any information on that publicly. If they know these routes, they can block them if they have cooperation from countries through which these routes are, where they are located. For example, if this is South Caucasus, that means that Ukraine and the United States will need to work with, Armenia, for example, or Georgia or Azerbaijan. It depends on, how the weapons are delivered. So I haven't heard on any, practical steps on what they are going to do exactly. So are they going to bomb these targets, convoys, or planes, or are they going to maintain a blockade of Iran? But this is very unrealistic. So are they going to strike military objects on Iranian soil? This is also one of options that could that is there on the table. At least but this is something that the United States can do, not Ukraine, of course. So it depends on what we are talking about here. Right now, I don't see how Ukraine can influence Iran in these terms. The United States, yes, they have different options of how they can deal with that, including military, non-military ones. One of the options is to re-engage diplomatically with Iran, offer them a nuclear deal, and
maybe it's time for it. Don't you?
This is one of the options they have. I mean, theoretically, this is one of the options they have. They can offer Iran to conclude the nuclear deal, to offer more concessions to Iran over this deal. And maybe this will prompt Iran to be more cautious in their deals with Russia.
Should we be more persistent in this way? So just tell USA that, could you help us? So maybe you could just not just transfer us new military help, but maybe you should talk with Iran, and it will be more effective and cheaper.
I think, again, this is something that is not done publicly. I think some kind of talks are already underway.
Confidentially?
Of course. I mean, you don't talk about this publicly, and if you want this, you can do that, but this is a strong signal again. And this is something that Ukraine should decide on its own. I mean, this is a position, and these are two absolutely different positions. One, let's talk to Iran, and second one, let's not talk to Iran and sanction it.
Yeah.
These are two
Totally
absolutely
agree.
different positions, and this is something that the Ukrainian leaders should decide on their own, together with the U.S. counterparts. Because again, there is another block of questions related to what do the United States want. Because again, of course, we can say like, let's talk to Iran. Let's let the Americans talk to Iran, but do they want to talk to Iran? This is a question because
That's a great point.
Yeah, because Biden administration has been talking to Iran since last year. They failed. Now with elections to Congress looming in less than a week, and with Republicans allegedly on the verge of victory, we don't know what will the United States position be on the nuclear talks with Iran, because the Republicans are known for their more radical, more they are less inclined to compromise on Iran. They are more critical of nuclear deal. So that's why we may appear in a situation when Ukraine, for example, tells our American partners that let's talk to Iran, but they will say, no, we don't want that because the policy is absolutely different, because the American policy is not to talk to Iran, but to sanction it. So it depends. I mean,
a lot of things, I think, depend on the situation USA and on elections.
On the regional situation in the Middle East, on the relationship between Iran and the US, on the political situation inside the US. So plenty of things which Ukraine cannot control, which we don't have influence over. And that's why, I mean, all Ukraine can do is to formulate a clear position on Iran. I mean, I think that our position was adequate in, for example, breaking off diplomatic relations with Iran. This is something that, yes, Ukraine should do, especially if if Iran will continue to provide Russia with with weaponry.
But do you think should we stop in this case export grain to Iran, because
we are not the major. We're not the key supplier of grain to Iran. So that's why they began to buy grain more from Russia than from us. So this is something. So yes, we could do that, but this is not a leverage that we can use. It's not so critical for Iran.
One more point. We know that Iran isn't an independent state, and Israel's intelligence officials, agents in Iran have their influence. So maybe it's time to enter in this situation with military support of Iran to Russia, and maybe it's time for Israel to make some decisions in this case.
Well, maybe it is time, but I think this is for Israel and Israeli people to decide. I mean, again, this is something that we cannot dictate them. I think Ukraine would want that Israel, provide us with all the weapons we need, but this is not something that is going to happen just, like magically, because
I mean that it's not about just military support. I understand Israel in this point because they have their views, but I mean that Israel has a good influence on Iran. So,
I don't think so.
No?
They have no influence over Iran. They are hostile. They are enemies.
Yeah.
So it's not like Israel can change Iran's behavior. They can counter Iran, and they are doing that in the Middle East. They have been doing that for decades. I mean, it depends. So that's why I think the logic here is that since Iran decided to partner with Russia, we can partner with Israel. It's an adequate logic, and I understand it. And maybe this is the right thing to do because, again, for Israel, Iran is a priority, is a security priority, and they understand that. But again, my point is that Iran's military cooperation with Russia does not guarantee 100% that Israel will step in and provide us with all weapons that we need. So this is not a guarantee because, as I understand, in Ukraine, many people tend to think that whenever there is Iran, Israel will come and do everything. No, because Iran is a top priority for Israel in their region, in the Middle East. So for them, for example, it's more for Israel. it is more important to fight Iran in, for example, in the border areas, in Lebanon, in neighboring Syria, right? So on the Palestinian territories, and that's why. So this is more important for them than fighting Iran in Ukraine, where you don't have Iranian fighters. You have just, they sold weapons to Russia. Okay, so what? I mean, that means that we can use Ukraine can use Iranian argument in negotiations with Israel, but I don't think that we need to have high expectations that Israel will do anything we want, because there is Iran. There is Iran board, and this is something they have some kind of magical influence over.
How do you estimate for now the dialogue between Ukraine and Israel?
I think the dialogue has been more active recently because of Iran. So this story with Iran-Russia partnership. But again, I think this dialogue it's very narrow, because we're talking only about weapons and what arms Israel can give Ukraine, and that's all, essentially.
Does it a mistake? Maybe we need to be broader?
Well, I think generally Ukraine needs to be broader in its engagement with the outer world. I mean, I have always thought, and I think this is something that Ukraine should have pursued, a more pragmatic, complex approach towards the Middle East in general, and Israel as well. We have never had a pragmatic, complex, like full-fledged policy towards Israel. That's why, and I think this is partially why our dialogue today is confined only to military issues, and we don't speak about anything else, because our relations are pretty limited. Well, we have never had like any deep relations with Israel, neither with Israel nor with Iran and with many other Middle Eastern countries. So maybe this is an opportunity to start to re-engage with Israel. But again, I think there is another reason why the dialogue was limited and pretty narrow, and why there were no answers from Israel, no clear position from Israel, because they have just had their elections, and I think that until there is the new government formed, no key decisions on armaments exports will be taken by Israel. So we need to wait until there is a government in place. We know who is the prime minister, what is the government, what parties are part of this government, and what are their position towards Russia-Ukraine war, if any.
And if we're talking about protests in Iran, and the protests that are in different countries, in European countries, and even in Ukraine. So what do you think, what is the red line on Iran's protests for example, USA to react and so on?
I don't think there is a red line. I mean, many countries, when the protests started, at least from my point of view, many countries were like improvising on how to react to the protests. So in my opinion, Western reaction to protests, to the political crisis in Iran, because this is a political crisis clearly, was mixed. Because some of them were like just paralyzed, where they didn't know how to react, because no one knew, how this will evolve, what will be the situation, will the protests win, how serious these protests were. Other countries, they decided immediately to support protests, and because they believed that this is something big, that this could lead to regime change or whatever. And others, they decided to wait, like the United States, because they waited for a couple of days before they began to cautiously make certain statements on like, we support protests and something like that. So
how long will they wait?
I think right now we can say for sure that the majority of Western countries, they supported protests officially, politically. So we are not talking about direct intervention. There is no direct intervention on their side. So we see that there is a political support for protests from Western countries, European and the United States, Canada. There is, the media coverage by Western media. It's primarily sympathetic to protests, so we can see that there is some kind of media influence over that, and that's all. So I can say that West's engagement or involvement in this story is pretty limited right now, at least, and I think this has something to do with with the fact that people don't know, and the governments don't know, what the situation will like. So they are pretty cautious. And I think this is, this is understandable because we don't know. I can say, for example, that the protests haven't become a critical threat to the Iranian government. So they are ongoing. Yes, this is a serious crisis in Iran of political system, but I don't think that the protests, at least now, I don't think that the protests will have the potential to, I don't know, change the government or the political system or replace it entirely. When, for example, when people are speaking about revolution, I don't think that this is a revolution yet.
So we will see how it's going on. And now there are a lot of talks about intervention of Iran in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So will it influence the situation of interference of the USA? Because USA already told that they will interfere.
Well, it depends. Again, it depends on what will happen. If we are talking about a full-fledged war between Iran and, for example, Saudi Arabia, yes, the United States have obligations to respond, to defend their ally, Saudi Arabia, and to help Saudi Arabia to defend its territory. Yes, they will intervene. If we are talking about, for example, some kind of yet another proxy-style attack on Saudi Arabian energy infrastructure from Yemen, nothing will happen, nothing will change, because we saw such attacks, similar attacks in previous years, and the United States response was pretty much limited. They couldn't do anything actually here because, Iran has been waging this proxy war against Saudi Arabia for years in Yemen.
Yeah, it's not new thing, yes, new story.
Well, this is their strategy. So they tend, and it's understandable because Saudi Arabia and their allies, including the United States, they're much more powerful than Iran. And that's why it's more logic to, there is more logic in not to directly wage war against this number of countries, but to try to organize a proxy several proxy conflicts through which you can tire down your enemies, like in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and so on, Iraq, and something like that. So that's why that is one of the reasons I think a full-fledged war between Iran and Saudi Arabia is unlikely. I don't think this is something they will do, because this is pretty much irrational, and there will be no benefits for Iran. They will lose this war.
Yeah, but for example, if the intervention is serious, USA will help Saudi Arabia with the military equipment. And so on. How it could influence the aid for Ukraine? What do you think?
Hypothetically, it could. Again, it depends, because we're modeling a situation here.
Yes,
we're not talking about real one.
But we just would like to see outlook, or maybe.
If there is, it depends on the scale of this war, on how long will it last, on how many countries will be involved in this war, and what will be the end game. Again, if it's just defending Saudi Arabian territory, this is one set of goals. If they will go further into Iran to conduct a regime change, this is another set of goals and resources needed for that. I think it could influence aid that is, for Ukraine, because, in my opinion, Western countries are not ready to face two massive, large crises at the same time. Oh, they will. I think they will handle it, but this will require much more resources and energy and even troops, on their behalf to do that. And Iran is a large country, and war with Iran would destabilize the Middle East for sure. Not only the Middle East, but also part of South Asia. Afghanistan is one of the neighboring countries, and the West will need to respond to, not only to the war itself, but to its consequences, which are humanitarian, social, and economic, nuclear ones, because Iran has a vast nuclear infrastructure. And this is why I think war for them, I think this war there will be no winners in such a war. That's why this war is, actually not preferable for anyone, I think, in the region, especially for Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia would lose. I think that one of the first targets for Iran would be Saudi Arabia's energy infrastructure. Well, at least I assume that. And again, war between Iran and Saudi Arabia would likely block free passage of oil tankers from the Gulf. And this is 60% of the oil supplies for the world market. So I would say that. For Ukraine, if we're talking about Ukraine's strategic interests, war is not a good thing. So for us, it is better that this war never starts, because this will be beneficial more for Russia than for Ukraine.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes, because turmoil on energy markets will benefit Russia. Because Russians, they would want to see more chaos in international relations, because chaos is something they can work with. When there are two simultaneous large-scale crises on the world arena, this gives them more arguments, more opportunities to try to convince the West to make a compromise on Ukraine. Because they could say, you have a problem with Iran in the Middle East, which is like on fire. Let's compromise, at least temporarily, on Ukraine. Let's freeze the conflict in Ukraine. And we will help you with Iran and some. So this is something that Russia very much wanted to see. Even when we had, I think you remember the situation when there was this crisis over Taiwan, when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan. Russian media were eager, they were jumping out of joy when they were covering this topic, because they were saying that yes, not right now, China will show the United States, their might. They will start a war. And they were very disappointed when this didn't happen, because they wanted such, a large crisis, another one that would divert attention from Ukraine and resources from Ukraine. It's not only about attention.
And the last but not least, how could be changed the status quo in Middle East thanks to this cooperation between Russia and Iran?
Well, it doesn't change. It doesn't change. The whole status quo in the Middle East as it is, because it concerns mostly Russia-Iran relations.
But some experts told that it could affect a lot the status quo in the Middle East.
I don't see how. I don't see how, because again, status quo in the Middle East is being maintained by a number of actors there. So, I don't see that. Iran's decision to partner with Russia, I think it is partially it's been dictated by what was going on in the Middle East. In my opinion, it's something that it is something that has to do with how Iran perceives the Middle East. Right now, what we're witnessing is the formulation of the setting up of a post-American Middle East. So a new status quo, a new balance of power after America, after the U.S., because the United States clearly doesn't want to do anything with the Middle East. They began to scale down their operations. They withdrew the most bulk of their forces from Iraq. They withdrew from Afghanistan. So clearly, the United States, since mid 2000s, they began to like scale down, to draw down, and to be less prioritized on what was going on in the Middle East in favor of China and Asia Pacific. So for Iran, this means, and for many other countries, this means that they have an opportunity to build up their own balance of power, a new regional order, a post-American one, in which they will have more voice and more, active role in it, and more to say, And that's why I think Iran is concerned that a post-American regional order, a new post-American regional order, would be built against him, against Iran, and I think this started when Israel and Gulf monarchies began to cooperate more closely on a number of issues. After Abraham Accords, which were mediated by the United States, when Israel and a number of Arab countries began to re-engage diplomatically, this was a clear message to Iran that a new regional order, anti-Iranian possibly, could emerge, and this is a clear strategic threat for them. That's why I think this is something. It's not to say that this particularly, was the main reason why they decided to partner with Russia, but this is something that was heavily debated in Iran, and this is something that prompted them to engage, to move closer to Russia and China in order to counter this influence, because they saw Israeli Gulf cooperation as a clear sign of an emerging anti-Iranian alliance in the Middle East under the US protection. That's why I think this is something. So this is the only link I have between the processes in the Middle East and Russia-Iran cooperation. So this is the only thing I see here.
We will see how it will be in the future very soon. Ilya, thank you that you be with us, and it was really pretty interesting talk. So I would like to mention that we had a guest, an analyst of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future, Ilya Kusa, and I was also happy to be with you. So see you in the next show.